Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry. Ready for some thought-provoking cerebral whipping and the destruction of ridiculous medical dogma? Want to shift those stale, moldy old paradigms? Well then, don that thinking cap of yours, get down in the cave, and join our host, Dr. Stephen Barrett, for this week's episode. Let's start spelunking.
My guest today is Dr. Torkil Faerø. He is the author of a book that is called The Pulse Cure. It is a best-selling book in Scandinavia, and he talks about many important biometric measurements, particularly heart rate variability. So we dive into some very cool subjects as far as all things biohacking and how to monitor them and maybe how to improve your personal game or the game of your patients. So please enjoy this fascinating conversation that I have with Dr. Torkil Faerø. All right, everyone, welcome to the Pod of Inquiry. I'm here with Dr. Torkil Faerø, and he's written a book that we're going to talk about called The Pulse Cure. Before we get to that and some of the cool stuff that he's laid out in that great book, Torkil, talk to us about all the stuff that you do besides being an ER physician and a general practice physician, because I think it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, that may be so, because I actually studied medicine in the first place to be able to live a free and adventurous life. So that was my, way into it. A bit different than many other doctors, I guess. But I knew that I could work like anywhere in the world. I could work part-time. I can live a free life. I could still work as a doctor and know why people do what they do and be at the front row of life, so to speak. I was interested in photography and traveling and sailing and living my own life. And that is also why I'm interested in health, so that you have your health so that you can live your life to the fullest. And that health is not necessarily the aim in itself, but it's a foundation to be able to live your life as long as you are able to live your life, and still have your health. So, I've been doing photography. I've just come back teaching cancer patients photography because I wrote a book called The Camera Cure on how to use, to take a picture is kind of a miniature problem, but the way you approach that problem, you can apply to anything in life, even complex situations like having cancer and processing having cancer. So, I've been teaching workshops also in normal photography and in Cuba, Sri Lanka, Ethiopia, France, Croatia, Morocco, many interesting places. So,
and you've made a couple of. I said you've made a couple of documentaries too, right?
Yeah. I made some documentaries for the Norwegian TV. About pilgrimages. So I've been fascinated by pilgrimages to walk for a month or even more on your way to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And we also have one in Norway. I've been walking to Rome and to Jerusalem, actually, even. So I'm not a Christian, but the process of walking towards a goal, relating to eating, walking, sleeping, simplifying life, getting the time to think, the time to process things outside the social media and all the all the disturbing factors in our lives. That has always been important to me. I like to do different things.
That's great. I think we'll talk about it a little bit more when we talk about how to learn to rest, which is a problem, but let's table that for a minute. I definitely want to get into that. But before we do that, I think you laid it out in your book that this was really, the book was started by your own personal journey where you had, been very active up to, I think it was about 1989, where you were into kayaking, and then you just kind of went into this black hole of inactivity, relatively speaking. And then you came out of that. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Because I've done all the mistakes in my book. So the book, The Pulse Cure, is really a book on how to do the best lifestyle changes to optimize your chances of living a long and healthy life. But I did all the mistakes in the book because even as a doctor, we didn't think it mattered so much how you lived your life. We thought that maybe if you lived your life in a very healthy way, you may live 2 or 3 years longer, but it would take you 2 or 3 years to do the exercise and sleep more and make the food, and why bother? And so I didn't care so much about my own health, actually. I was busy thinking about adventures and wasn't really looking into myself and my own health. But then my father died at 73 and, from cancer. And I saw his sorrow of not being able to watch his grandchildren grow up, and he was still loving life, and I took a look in the mirror and I saw that I started to look like my patients. I weighed 40 pounds more than I do today. I did not exercise at all, did not care much about what I was eating or sleeping, and didn't know so much about, chronic inflammation, stress, all these things that we know so much today, but that was relatively unknown 10 years ago when I started changing my life. So I was reading for the first time since medical school. I was opening books on how to be more healthy and preventative medicine that I didn't really care so much before this. So yeah, it was just a desire to not share the destiny of my father and to be able to do what I can do to live into my 90s and still be safe,
Right. Live long and match it with a long health span.
That's right.
Right. So as a physician, you would counsel patients routinely on myriad different things that, to improve their health. But one of the things that I found was probably the most empowering is if I could give the patient a metric, whether it was a biomarker in a blood test that we were looking at, whether it's heart rate variability, and we're going to talk about that. So I think this is really striking because you're a perfect example of being in an area where you have a very high level of medical knowledge, but yet you haven't quite connected it to the next step of all of the important things: the sleep, the exercise, the mindfulness, the learning how to rest, and it seems like you were able to do that partly not only by the epiphany that you had with your father's early death, but also because you were able to measure it. So just like you would look at an EKG in the hospital, you had something that you could share with the patient from a metric standpoint. Am I understanding that kind of where you're coming from on that?
That's right. So the last 5 years I've been using heart rate monitors. The first couple of years, an ECG monitor, attached to my chest, taped to my chest. And then for the last 3 years, I've been using Garmin watches and Oura rings and Whoop band and several of the devices now on the market to measure the heart rate variability, which is such an important metric for your overall health and for your control of your autonomic nervous system and your stress balance.
So let's talk.
I've been using that. Yeah.
Let's talk about heart rate variability. A lot of biohackers know what it is, or they have an idea. They think they know what it is. But in your book, I think you laid it out as how it relates to the sympathetic tone versus the parasympathetic tone. So can you explain a little bit of insight into that?
Yeah. The beauty of it is that the very basic function of our bodies, the vital function of our heart rate, can tell us so much about what is going on in our body, both on the autonomic nervous system, but also down to the cell level and mitochondrial level. And so everything that stresses our system will be detected in the heart rate. It will respond very quickly to even small demands on our body. And this is why we can use heart rate variability as a very useful metric in many ways. But what heart rate variability is the variation between heartbeats. And if we are in the restful state, the parasympathetic state, then when we breathe in, the heart rate goes up a little bit. And when we breathe out, the heart rate goes down a little bit to save some energy while there is less oxygen in the lungs. And when we get into the fight and flight mode, the sympathetic stressful state, the activating mobilizing state, then the heart rate will beat like a metronome, very steady. And then, of course, the devices can detect this and then measure and estimate whether you are in the parasympathetic state or in the sympathetic state, and how deep into these states are you. And of course, then also accumulate it over time, so that it can give you a measure whether you are in a sustainable stress balance or not. And of course, now that 80% of our diseases that we treat as doctors are related to stress in a kind of a broad sense, most people will find that they are too stressed, just as I did. It was such a surprise to me, because I had learned in medical school that you have the stress, and you have the fight, flight, and freeze, and rest and digest.
Right.
And of course, I was never fighting, never freezing, never, I was didn't feel stressed at all. So I would expect to have very calm readings. Everybody said that you were so calm and so on, but I saw that there are lots of stress in my life. But it came from surprising sources. It came from food. It came from alcohol. It came from tobacco or nicotine products. It came from eating too late or training too hard. So there was, and in the altitude, heat, there was so many factors that I had never thought about would be a stressful or a strain on my system. Not to mention all the small things that we do every day.
Right.
That there's also a price for that too. Yeah.
And so when you started monitoring your heart rate, and you talked about this in your book, or I should say your heart rate variability, and you talked about this in your book, you were actually shocked sometimes because you felt like you were pretty relaxed, but based on the monitor, you weren't.
Yeah. So I could, for example, I could lie in the sofa watching a TV series, and after having eaten something with with crisps or candy or sweets or something, I would still be stressed.
Right.
And that was a total surprise. And I also used to do something that we have in Norway. It's a kind of a tobacco product that we put under the lip. And that would really stress me out. That would raise my heart rate from 60 till 70. But I would feel calm because of the nicotine. I was feeling, probably, yeah. So, it will show the other sides of stress that we don't think about. I listened to your brilliant conversation about the stress system. I don't remember his name, but and most people think of stress just as I did, that it's a mental state. So when people talk about stress, it's either, is it too much stress at your work? Is it something going on in your family? Is it too much to do in those 24 hours of the day, and so on? But the stress, when you watch your monitor, you see that stress comes from many places and can really affect you. So
yeah, that was an episode with Dr. Steven Sideroff, and he really laid out stress really well. And the way I liken some of these biometric measurement systems is, for a period of time, I wore a continuous glucose monitor. It was a Dexcom G6 back then. They've got better iterations now, but it was shocking because I would think that I was eating something pretty healthy. Well, let's say a cup of popcorn. That seems pretty cool. And boom, you just watch your glucose just shoot up from that. And it's like, there's no way you would have ever been able to acknowledge that just the way you felt or from your physical presence. So having these biometrics are really, really important and very, I think they're very Skinnerian. They really shape your behavior. Because when you look at this, like, oh, maybe I'm not going to have that popcorn now because I remember what it did on my CGM. And I think that's a lot. Now, so heart rate variability changes as we age. It goes down, obviously, kind of like testosterone levels. But people have to be careful when they're evaluating this, not to compare it to necessarily somebody else, but to get their baseline and then go off of that. Is that how you feel about it?
That's right. Everybody will have their own personal baseline with I think it's around 50% or 30 to 50% individual genetic, aspect to it. So there's no need to compare it, to another person's HRV. So you could still, one person could have like 25 in HRV and another one could have 50, but they could have exactly the same objective level of health.
Right.
So you should compare it to your best level at your best days and see what is achievable for you.
Right, right. So let's talk about exercise, because one of the things that I've realized, even in my own situation, but from almost everyone, we tend to over-exercise if we're into it, and so taking that rest day is a lot harder sometimes than for the person to do their regular exercise.
Yeah, exactly. Most people train too hard, and particularly athletes, I think. And I used to, as you mentioned earlier on, that I used to be on the national team in kayaking, and we used to train hard at the maximum heart rate every day, for 40, 45 minutes. There was nothing like an easy day. And of course, now with these monitors, we could have seen that this is way too hard, that we would train and put more loads on our bodies before we had recovered and got the payback from the last exercise. So most people train too hard, and that is how these monitors can guide us to see if you are training too hard, and particularly if you otherwise lead a stressful life. So if you have a very quiet office job and you're in a very unstressed situation, then you can push yourself a lot harder than another person that may be a teacher or nurse or something else that is more strenuous. And so you have to see the whole picture stress-wise, your sleep, your activity, your food, and so on. So you may find out, and so many people find out, that they have a food intolerance, that they have a stress level that is very hard to go down, even if they do all the right things, breathing and relaxing, and they can see that it's still a lot of stress in their bodies. Then it's quite often because of some food intolerance. The most common is gluten, and then milk, and a lot of other foodstuffs as well that they could react to, and that would keep them in the stress mode, even if they are relaxing as hard as they can.
Yeah, I want to go back to stress just for a second, because 20 years ago, everybody believed that, it's stressful, but, suck it up, buttercup, and move on. Don't worry. It was kind of like sleep was back in the day. People would brag, well, I got 3 hours of sleep last night and I feel great. It's like, well, no, you don't, but you didn't know then that those types of things. But you pointed out that there's a direct relationship between the immune system and being stressed. And I thought it was really very cool. You laid out something about interleukin-6, a cytokine that if it comes from the muscle, it is anti-inflammatory. And if it comes from adipose, it's actually inflammatory. I had only realized that cytokine was only pro-inflammatory. I never realized that it had a anti-inflammatory benefit depending on the source of the tissue that excreted it.
Yeah, it seems to be this way. Yeah,
that's pretty crazy if you think about it. I mean,
yeah, and of course it's expensive and hard to measure these cytokines, but heart rate variability is a kind of a proxy for this general state of your immune system, whether you have a high level of inflammation or a low level of inflammation. So it's kind of a window into the state of these cytokines and these levels.
Right. And it's pretty easy if you understand that stress is going to increase cortisol and it's going to, have these effects and create these cytokines. It's pretty easy to see how that can ultimately lead to chronic disease and regardless of the organ system that we're talking about. But sometimes you need to make that connection in order to adopt more of like, all right, I really need to address this one pillar of biohacking or of health, and that being stress. And and let's get into the calm a little bit. Like you point out in your book, and I believe this is totally true based on my experiences, that maybe the number one drug or best agent to create calmness is breath work. And so talk to us a little bit about breath work. I've had a little bit of experience recently with some types of breath work. And I mean, in the United States, we're not trained how to breathe. I mean, the fact of the matter is it's something that's so rudimentary, but yet, and it's an autonomic function, but we can control it. I mean, it's maybe one of the only autonomic things that we can control. But yeah, talk to us about breath work and your take on that. Before we continue with this great discussion, I just want to take a quick break to acknowledge this week's sponsor. I'm constantly exploring new avenues to enhance well-being and address any health concerns. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce you to an exciting supplement called STEM Regen, which I take daily and genuinely believe could revolutionize your health journey as well. STEM Regen stands out as a game changer in the realm of wellness. Crafted from 5 potent plant extracts, it boasts a remarkable ability to stimulate the release of your body's own stem cells from your red bone marrow. Why is this significant? Well, stem cells are the superheroes of our body's natural repair system. They possess the extraordinary capacity to morph into various cell types, aiding in tissue regeneration and repair. As we age, the quantity of circulating stem cells in our system reduces significantly, impairing our body's ability to heal and rejuvenate itself effectively. STEM Regen steps in to counter this decline by kickstarting the release of stem cells into circulation, thereby bolstering your body's innate repair mechanisms. Once unleashed into your bloodstream, these mobilized stem cells actively seek out areas of damage or injury, initiating the healing process. By incorporating STEM Regen into your daily routine, you're essentially empowering your body to tap into its own regenerative prowess more efficiently. I firmly believe that STEM Regen could be a valuable addition to your wellness regimen, especially if you're seeking to fortify overall health and vitality, accelerate tissue repair, or expedite recovery from injury or illness. This first of its kind stem cell mobilizer is changing the game in regenerative medicine. Don't wait to unleash your body's innate healing capabilities. Visit stemregen.co/Dr. Steven, that's with a PH, and use the code SBPOD to get a 15% discount off your first order of STEM Regen.
Yeah, the breath is kind of a lever into our autonomic nervous system that, as you say, will work, even if we are unconscious about it, but we can also regulate it and take control over it. So if we are stressed because there are stressful circumstances, then we will breathe faster and shorter and more shallow than normal if we are calm. So we can also trick our body into calmness by the breath, so that if we breathe slowly and preferably down to 6 breaths a minute, and preferably even like a little bit more time on the out breath and on the in breath, that is a way to calm ourselves down. For example, 4 seconds in and 6 seconds out seems to be a very relaxing and calming way to calm your body down. And probably it's our ancient brain, the foundations in our brain, the kind of reptilian brain that is controlling the autonomic nervous system is 100 or 150 million years old, or even older than that. And it responds to the signals from the body on a very basic level. So when it can feel that you are breathing slowly, it's kind of a sign that, okay, things are quiet out there. We can relax. We can kind of switch on the recovery mode and let our immune system do its job. So that is why both cold and breathwork, they are some of the most efficient ways that me and so many other people have found, because it's not only my experience, it's because the book has been, it's actually today I got to know that it's still number 7 on the bestseller list, almost 2 years since its release. And I get so many people telling me information, and I also gathered some information about this for my next book. It's called The Rest Cure. And so breathwork seems to work on so many people. So that is most people's go-to strategy to calm themselves down. And often combined with maybe like yoga nidra or some meditation that is often also using breath, in their strategy.
Right. So there's a lot of different types of breath work. Wim Hof has done a lot of work. I think he's up in the Netherlands, right? Not far from you. And yeah. And then there's holotropic breath work where you hyperventilate and can almost induce psychedelic states. And, so there's a lot of power to it. But one of the things you pointed out in your book, and I've been harping on this for years, is nose breathing versus mouth breathing, especially at the time of sleep. And if somebody is having trouble sleeping, if they learn how to tape their mouth shut at night, the metrics are just unbelievable. Once they see those metrics, it's pretty incredible how powerful nose breathing is versus mouth breathing. But
yeah, really, because our noses are, of course, especially made to optimize the airflow into our lungs in so many ways, including picking up nitric oxide from the sinuses that will dilate our blood vessels and do a lot of good stuff for our body. In general, nitric oxide in so many functions in the body, and you probably know all about that. So breathing with our nose instead of our mouth is so important. And and to use the mouth tape is a very easy way to solve that if you're not breathing with your nose. And you will see it in the heart rate variability. So the ones who tend to open their mouth during the night, when they use the mouth tape, they can see the result on their watches.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
And that's a very important motivator, to do the right things. And what is also so beautiful is that the right things for our body, to exercise, to sleep, to eat the right food, to get enough sunlight, to get earthing, to get so many of these healthy, to have good relations, and all of these things will show in the heart rate. It will make a difference, and we can measure it. So it becomes kind of a speedometer of the intensity of our lives, and makes it so much easier to maneuver and navigate in these stressful times that we live in. So and motivates us to do this often a bit hard choices, to do fasting or cold showers or breath work, and put in the effort that you need to calm yourself down, because that's actually quite you need to do some effort to break down your speeds
Well, I think it's a lot easier to force yourself to run or to lift weights than it is to try to find your calm, because if I found the magic bottle on the beach and I opened it up and the genie could say what was what's your first wish, I would say to learn how to relax, to be in the present without having to worry about the past or the future, and just to actually enjoy that moment. It's not an easy thing to do. I think that might be the single hardest thing in optimizing health, is learning how to do that. I also think that while you can read something about breathing like Wim Hof or these types of things, it's not that easy, that there are nuances to it. And if you have somebody that's trained in teaching how to do the breath work, it makes it that much easier. And so that's just been my personal experience. I think the thing about mouth taping is not only will they notice a significant improvement in their heart rate variability and their quality of sleep from REM to deep, every metric will improve, but their spouse will tell you, hey, they stopped snoring. So that's that's a big plus. So anyhow, imagine I was a patient and I'm coming to you and I'm saying, listen, I know I got to get my game together. I haven't been doing things the right way. You're going to hook me up to these monitors. Which monitors would you recommend I start with? What am I going to look for? And let's just talk about, in general. We don't have to break it down per sleep or but the monitoring process. I want some of your insight on that.
Yeah, so far, by far the best and most and cheapest and most accessible product is the Garmin watches. So Garmin has been having a system where they have the body battery that you can see in the morning how much resources, physiological resources do you have measured in a body battery? How much have you been charging overnight? And so you will see like today, after a really stressful day yesterday, I had a 60 in a body battery, which is a bit low for me. So I prefer to have 80 or more. So it gives me a number that I can use to see how well recovered am I, how much should I train, how much strain should I put on my system today. And then you can see as the day goes by, you can see that, okay, it will go down fast or slow according to how you regulate your stress, to manage your stress.
Let me interrupt you there. Let me interrupt you there, Torkil, because what is the algorithm? What are the components that the body battery are looking at versus like like on your Aura ring?
Mainly HRV.
Okay.
Yeah, it's mainly HRV. Yeah.
Okay. On the Aura ring, you get a readiness score every morning. And that's probably, I don't know what their algorithm is, but that's probably HRV as well, predominantly.
Yeah, it is. It is. And other factors as well. But I think on the Garmin watch, the HRV is a more important, aspect of this body battery than it is in the readiness score on Aura. So they differ a little bit in how they interpret the data and how they use it in their algorithms. But as you say, with the Aura ring, you get the state, the readiness state in the morning. But it's like that you don't know why it turned out that way. But Garmin will show it 24/7. So you will see the stress level at any point of the day, so that you can see that, for example, it was the lunch that I ate with gluten and milk and the cake at the end, for example, that made the stress go up for 3 or 4 hours. So then you can see that. And of course, you can also see it in real time. You can always push a button and see what the stress level is, like mine is now 65. It's okay. But and that is probably mostly because I've been eating dinner just 1 hour ago. So I can see the effect mostly from the food. So so you have this way to see the speedometer at any given moment, and that you have also, just like if you're in the car, you can see how much gas is left on the tank. And of course, it's not like a GPS in the car. It's not as accurate, but it's a very good and useful metric. And for so many people that are on the verge of like burnout and really struggling with their stress level, it's so much easier to be able to catch the energy thieves that you didn't know was there, and then start to regulate this. Yeah.
So in summary, you think that from a concurrent way to evaluate HRV, the Garmin's probably the best way to go. I don't know that you can really do it on the Aura. They do have a little stress thing, but it really is not something that you can real time monitor.
It's very rudimentary. Yeah. So they have some daytime stress. They probably were like forced to have some function into it, but it's not really anywhere near the Garmin. But so many things are happening on this market now. So I know Samsung is coming out with new watches and Samsung rings, and so there is kind of a big, so many. And the good thing for me as a doctor is that there is money into preventative healthcare. That these manufacturers can make money from something that can keep us from getting sick. But because the problem now is that there's too much money in sick people, in treating them with medicine and procedures and so on, and that there is money on the front side of disease and not just afterwards. I'm very optimistic about that, because this is really a tool that can make you take charge of your own health and to be able to control it and measure it and see the results. So it's in my eyes, this is kind of a revolution, almost at the size of antibiotics or vaccines, because it's such a powerful tool against the modern day diseases of stress and inflammation.
Well, I don't know how it is in Europe, but our system has no reimbursement model for counseling and preventive disease and those types of things. It's designed here, the healthcare is a system to take care of chronic diseases or acute trauma in the hospital, car wrecks, those types of things, which we're very, very good at that. Don't get me wrong, but there's just no financial incentive here for physicians to take the time to educate patients and to monitor them and bring them along that will pay huge dividends, not only to them, but to society. Imagine, I forget what percentage of our GDP that we spend on healthcare in the United States, but it's pretty astounding.
It's extreme.
Yeah. And
it's shocking. Yeah.
And the results are not emblematic of that type of extreme expenditure, let me tell you.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that everything that you really need to do to keep your health is free. It doesn't cost any money. All the advice in the pulse cure that works, they're free.
Right.
So the breath work is free, sleep is free, exercise is usually free. The cold plunges and so on is free, and resting and napping and drinking, staying hydrated, and even skipping alcohol is cheaper than the alternative. So,
right.
And getting sunshine, all of these things. Yeah. So it's all about getting a bit more back to the natural state that we were in from our evolutions, that we are, living our lives in tune with biology and not against it. Because if we work against our biology, we lose. And we are kind of losing at so many fronts in this. We're sleeping at odd hours of the day. We're not moving as much as we should. Sleeping less, eating ultra processed food, and there's so many attacks on our physiology. And
well, I think too, some of the things you point out in your book really send this message home. For example, you talked about how sleepless night can decrease your natural killer cells 70%. That's just one night. Think about the poor person who has major sleep disturbances over a period of time, and then factor that into their chronic disease profile. I think it's pretty easy to see why it happens, but it's not necessarily so easy to correct it. I'm not trying to say that.
Yeah. So, and you can also see that, probably you saw that with your continuous glucose monitor, that if you have been sleeping a little less that night, then your blood glucose from the same meal would be a lot higher than from a night with good sleep. So,
Well, the most shocking thing I discovered with 6 months of continuous glucose monitoring was the stress response. And it's a long story, but basically I had been in a fast for about 17, 18 hours. And then I had to go visit a family member who was dying, and I hadn't eaten anything. And and my glucose just went off the charts. And in fact, to the point where it sent me an alarm. It's like, well, wait a second, man. I have not eaten anything for more than a half a day. And why? And then it dawned on me, well, you're really stressed. This is cortisol, man. It's just like driving everything up. So again, it's without that monitoring, you would never have known that. I mean, you feel stressed a little bit, but not that, not that much.
Absolutely. And that is so interesting with evolution. I also experienced the same thing myself. That if I was fasting and then having a speech or something that stresses me, the blood sugar would really go high. And I even had a small surgery where there was like with anesthetics and adrenaline and some cortisol, and my blood sugar really got high, just even then in a fasting state. And we don't have a sense of this because it has never needed to be monitored. We have excellent eyesight, we have excellent hearing, a sense of touch. We can feel a small wind blow through against our face, and we can smell trillions of different smells. But we don't really feel either our blood sugar level or the stress level, because it has never been a problem, throughout the history.
Right.
So, and it has even, on the stress part, it has even been downplayed or muted, so that if we had felt our own stress, it would have disturbed the senses from the outward threats. But in these days, the threats to our health comes from the inside, from the stress level itself. And, I would not know now, as I'm speaking, if I have 60 or 85 in a heart rate. I would not be able to tell. And that is a very huge step in stress level or level of inflammation that I just can't feel, or nobody, I think, would feel this. So it's just, and the heart rate monitors can be then a kind of substitution for the sense that we never needed to develop throughout history, I think.
Right. No, I think, that's a great point. I mean, the only time you can feel your heart rate is when you become tachycardic and you're really having a problem. I mean, like you said,
really,
exactly. So, and the same thing with blood pressure. You don't really, if your blood pressure is a little high that day, you don't know, unless you take your blood pressure, So again, that's why I think the monitoring is so important. So the patient comes into you and they say, I want to start on this program. And from what I've heard, you're probably going to recommend the Garmin, one of the Garmin watches to them, because the entry level is pretty inexpensive and it has a lot of utility. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. And then would you throw an Oura ring in on top of that? Or
yes, I would. For the ones who are particularly interested in sleep, then the sleep phases will be better. And I also think it's nice to have a second opinion, so that if you get some weird readings from your Garmin or unexpected readings, that you can see, is the Oura ring, does it agree with this sudden change? Because like me, if I eat a meal of chili, that will be a really low heart rate variability the day after. My body really reacts to it with a higher heart rate during the night. And then, for example, if you saw that, then you can check, okay, does my Oura ring say the same or not? So I think it's good to have two devices. I have two devices currently. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, I see the Oura. Yeah. So awesome. So your next book is going to be about getting into the calm.
Yeah, getting rest, measurable rest, and because I was even at the start of the book, I wanted to go to a yoga retreat in Italy, thinking that I would find total bliss and calm.
Right.
But the food was stressful and the heat was stressful. So it was a lot of stress on the monitor, and I felt exhausted too. So it tells you that the stress comes from surprising sources. Although to find rest in your mind, you also have to find rest in the rest of your body. And actually, one that has contributed to the book said that her best strategy for keeping her anxiety in order was restricted time feeding. So as long as she was eating from between 11 until 7, her anxiety was okay. Right. But if she was eating just like she used to do before she read the Pulse Cure, because this is one of the devices, then she was a lot more stressed. So it tells you it's more complicated than just looking at the mental side of stress. So, and you asked me what I would advise people to do, and once they start using the devices, I would advise them not to change anything for the first maybe 1 or even 2 months, just to see what is your baseline. How does the way that you're living now affect your lifestyle? And then, of course, you will quite fast, you will find the big energy things. You will find alcohol, that it is much, much worse for your physiology than you thought, or most people experience that. And you will find that a late night meal, and particularly if it's pizza or something like that, will affect your sleep much more than you thought. So you will quite quickly find out some of these big things, and then after a while you will be able to find the smaller things as well that makes it possible to regulate better, and you will feel the well-being. So it's not only good for health and longevity, but it's also good for well-being in the moment and performance. You will perform better because the connection, if you are stressed, just like the last conversation on stress that I with a complicated name, I don't remember. He said that when you are stressed, the connection to your prefrontal cortex is worse, so that you perform better in your business life or whatever you are trying to achieve. You perform better if you have a good regulated, well-regulated autonomic nervous system.
Right.
Your brain, our human brain, is working better when we get the reptilian brain in order.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, people have this delusion that you have to eliminate all stress. Well, you actually need some stress to function. And so you have to look at the stress performance curve. And they've looked at this in, Air Force pilots and stuff like that, where they perform maximally just right before they get to the peak of going and dropping into an impairment from their stress. So they have to have stress in order to, but a lot of it has to do with, not getting too much stress and then being able to manage it and have those periods. So, and that was one of the things that I was going to ask you. So like with the Garmin and where you're monitoring the heart rate variability, let's say you go in and you do a great session of breath work. Are you able to kind of concurrently or contemporaneously get okay, before I started the breath work, here was my HRV, and after here, are you able to see that, or is it too?
Yeah, you'll be able to see that on the stress level then. So on the Garmin watch, you will see that your stress level that they make to 0 to 100 will go down, probably like from 60 to 35 or something, when you do the breath work for maybe 5 minutes. So you'll see that. So if you're in a meeting at your job and you see that you're too stressed, you can do these things to mitigate it in real time.
That's fantastic. That's great. Torkil, thank you so much for coming on today. And I'm going to encourage everybody to look at his book. It's actually very good, fun to read. And I think you've got a lot of stuff in there from the entire panoply of different biohacking things. And, so.
I'm trying to get all the advice that you need,
right.
in a short and understandable and actionable way on as short time as possible. That's what I like myself. So that's what I'm trying to.
Well, I think you've done a good
do in my books.
I think you've done a great job with that. And I'm looking forward to your next book. When do you expect it out?
In Norwegian, it will be out this January, and then we will see if other translations will come. So the Polsker is translated into 8 languages now, I think. So it's we will see. So it will depend that the publisher.
Will you do me?
Publish it.
Will you do me a favor? And that's email me when it's in English.
Yeah. I'll do that. All
right. Yeah. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate your expertise and you taking the time, and look forward to having another conversation with you about rest.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, telling about this passion of mine. So
thank you. And now a message from our sponsor. Well, folks, if you're over 40 and you're not using a supplement to augment nitric oxide production, you should really rethink that. This molecule is absolutely imperative to health, not to mention the cardio protection. Nitric oxide is a physiological molecule that does so many things for your health. I never miss a day of nitric oxide supplementation. That's how important it is. Long overdue, there is now a nitric oxide replenishment formula without the fear of oxalates. Approved Medical Solutions does not use beets, spinach, or arginine. Approved Medical Solutions is proud to offer our audience their oxalate-free nitric oxide formula. If you are not a healthcare provider, you can still get started by going to approvedmedicalsolutions.com and use the code SBarrett at checkout, and you will receive a 10% medical discount savings. For licensed practitioners, just go to approvedmedicalsolutions.com and register. They have unique bundles for all of the full-fledged spelunkers of the Pod of Inquiry. Use Pod of Inquiry at checkout after registration, and I am certain you will be pleased not only for yourself, but for all of your patients. Here's a little secret. If you order their testing strips and test every patient for a few clinic days, you will see that nearly every one of them will be deficient. When they see this result, they will want you to start them on it immediately. Now, thanks to approved medical solutions, you can give them the best care without the worry of oxalates. Thanks for watching. You can start today. I hope you all enjoyed today's show and got some truly empowering knowledge out of it. You can always follow up on anything we talked about in the show notes found at our website, podofinquiry.com. If you think you might have tickled just a few neurons inside that cerebral cortex, please spread the word to your friends and colleagues and tell them that they need to get spelunking. Also, if you can take a minute to leave a review on your podcast provider of choice, and especially Apple Podcasts, that would greatly help the show and be so appreciated, provided it's positive. And if not, then just keep your pie hole shut and stay down in that cave. Let's keep spelunking.
This podcast is designed for informational purposes only and does not constitute any medical or surgical consulting advice or imply a development of any physician-patient relationship. The opinions of guests who are featured on the show are not necessarily the opinions of Dr. Barrett or the production team. This podcast is owned solely by Barrett Medical and Surgical Media, LLC. While the show is highly oriented for physicians and healthcare providers, anyone interested in the improvement of human performance and understanding will find this a welcome goblet to sip from, or guzzle. However, no representation or warranties are made in any way whatsoever on this podcast for any products, techniques, or other things discussed. Invited guests are not vetted by the Pod of Inquiry for their qualifications and may have a direct or indirect financial interest in what they present and discuss on the show. The Pod of Inquiry disclaims any responsibility from anything taken from the show and used personally or professionally. It is a responsibility of the listener to perform their own due diligence prior to the implementation of any ideas, products, techniques, or anything talked about on the show.